Hello, and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Cecilia, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-host, Zacks Small Cap Research, we're very pleased you've joined us for our next live presentation from Chromocell Therapeutics. Please note you can submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Frank Nuttall, Chief Executive Officer of Chromocell Therapeutics Corporation, which trades on the NYSE American under the symbol CHRO. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you all for joining me today and giving me an opportunity to share with you the work we're doing at Chromocell Therapeutics to treat various pain indications. As Cecilia mentioned, my name is Frank Nuttall. I'm the company's CEO, and we'll provide a little bit of background on the company and then more details to our preclinical and clinical programs. Before we commence, obligatory legal disclosure on forward-looking statements. The full statement is available on our website for your reading leisure. With that out of the way, what is Chromocell Therapeutics? So Chromocell is a pioneer in the development of non-opioid pain treatment therapies. We are focused specifically on NaV1.7 receptors, which are responsible for sensing and transmitting pain in the peripheral nervous system. The NaV1.7 receptors are genetically validated and are born out of the work from Dr. Stephen Waxman, who's a member of our scientific advisory board. The original technology underlying the isolation of our molecule was created by our former parent company, which created the technology to isolate molecules for therapeutic purposes. Along the way, we had a partnership with Astellas for the funding of some of the preclinical and phase 1 studies, and this resulted in 2 programs. One, under the designation CC8464 for the treatment of various chronic pain indications, and this program is in the clinical stage and has been through numerous phase 1 studies. The other program that arises from the isolation of this molecule is the CT2000 program, which is for the treatment of acute and chronic eye pain. As Cecilia mentioned, we are public on the New York Stock Exchange after having been spun out of our former parent company in August of 2022 and raised capital earlier this year for our clinical and preclinical programs. Couple key investment highlights. So our compound is a novel, peripherally restricted NaV1.7 receptor target that is, as I mentioned, genetically validated and does not penetrate the CNS and therefore does not cause euphoria or any indications of abusive use. Importantly, we have, as I mentioned, been through a number of phase 1 studies. We've also shown strong preclinical data in various animal models for the treatment of acute and chronic pain, post-surgical pain, and neuropathic pain. We have an experienced team of entrepreneurs and life science individuals with a robust board and scientific advisory board group. The intellectual property is patented. We have patent coverage through 2034 or later, depending on the jurisdiction, in countries representing approximately 2.2 billion people. Additionally, our chronic pain indications will be orphan designatable and will have additional protective provisions associated with market exclusivity for a certain number of years. So all in all, we have a very robust intellectual property portfolio and high barriers and protective provisions. As we all know, of course, the pain market is very large. In the United States alone, it's approximately $80 billion. And it is our goal to build non-opioid pain treatment therapies to chip away at that. A little bit of background on the management team. I have a great deal of experience in building early stage companies in life science and technology. I've had a number of successful M&A transactions, very experienced with the capital markets, building development teams, and experience with licensing programs both in and out. Our medical program is led by Dr. Eric Lang, who's our Chief Medical Officer. He's a trained anesthesiologist who practiced as a doctor for a period of time, and for the last 25 years has been in drug development at both large and small companies, including J&J, and has successfully led a number of NDA submissions. Our IPA program is under the guidance of Simon Chandler, who's our VP of Clinical Development, who's been in the drug development world for approximately 30 years, specifically focused on developing drugs for eye indications. So, so what are sodium channels? Adult bodies have 8 sodium channels, 3 for the central nervous system, 1 each for the heart and muscular systems, and 3 for the peripheral nervous systems. We're specifically targeting NaV 1.7, which is one of the 3 for the peripheral nervous system. You may be familiar with Vertex, which has had 2 successful readouts earlier this year on their NaV 1.8 drug. And it's basically just an adjacent channel. You can look at sodium channels as the body's electrical highway system. So we're specifically targeting the NaV 1.7, which is believed to be the channel that is for the onset of the pain. And it is our goal in blocking that to block the pain reception. So why do we think this is going to work? As it turns out, there's 2 indications on different ends of the spectrum that have genetically validated 1.7 as a very effective target for the treatment of pain management. On one hand, you have congenital insensitivity to pain, known as CIPA. Someone who suffers from CIPA has no NaV 1.7 activity, and they experience no pain. So childbirth, tooth extraction, surgery, they will not experience pain. On the flip side, someone who has an overabundance of NaV 1.7 activity suffers from erythromelalgia, which is one of the indications we're targeting. Someone who suffers from erythromelalgia has an overabundance of NaV 1.7 activity and experiences searing pain. So what we have is, 2 ends of the spectrum where it genetically validates NaV 1.7 as a very effective and appropriate target for the treatment of pain. A little bit of background on where we are. So from a CMC and preclinical perspective, as I mentioned, we had a number of very effective animal models showing that we reduce pain in acute, chronic, neuropathic, post-surgical pain. In fact, every one of our animal models was a success, and so we're very happy with that. So, from a CMC perspective, we have inventory of API and tablets in different strengths, as well as placebo. So we're well set up for the upcoming studies that we are working on, as well as the ones we're currently working on today. From a toxicological perspective, we had no genotoxicity and can dose patients for upwards of 3 months based on the work we've done. And then on a preclinical and clinical perspective, our chronic pain program had 4 phase 1 studies. During those studies, we experienced no cardiovascular impact, no renal or liver toxicity, no euphoric effects associated with crossing the blood-brain barrier. And the only safety incidents we experienced was that of rashes in approximately 4% of the patient population. So how are we going to deal with that? So we discussed the findings with the FDA, as well as experts in the field, evaluated the class of drugs we're working on, and note that there is a dose escalation regime, that substantially addresses or eliminates the incidence of rashes. So we are targeting the launch of a dose study in the latter part of Q4, where we will gradually increase the daily dosage across an 8-week span from 25 milligrams a day to up to 800 milligrams a day. We believe that the therapeutic dosage for our drug is in a 400 to 600 milligram per day level based on the animal studies we've conducted. And it's important to note that our phase 1 studies actually dosed up to 1,800 milligrams per day. So we believe that A, we will be covering the therapeutic range, and B, that this dose escalation regime and gradually getting the body acquainted with the drug will substantially mitigate and potentially even reduce or eliminate the incidence of rashes. As I mentioned, we're going after a number of different chronic pain programs. One is erythromelalgia, which I referenced earlier. Erythromelalgia sufferers of erythromelalgia are subject to searing pain in their extremities, most often in their hands and feet. And there's two types, genetic and secondary. Secondary is much more prevalent and usually onsets in midlife. And someone who suffers from that will suffer from that for the rest of their lives. At the moment, there are no good therapeutic options, so there's significant unmet medical need on this indication. And there's upwards of 50,000 patients in the United States alone. And there's no research that suggests that there's differences amongst population. So worldwide, we'd expect to have under patent coverage, 400,000 to 500,000 patients, and then subject to orphan designation, some number of millions. We anticipate filing for orphan designation and expect success based on the characteristics of this indication, and we'll also be seeking fast track. Corresponding with the dose escalation study, we're going to do what we're calling a pilot study on a limited number of erythromelalgia patients to get an early indication of efficacy. Someone who suffers from erythromelalgia will have their flares induced by things we all take for granted: clothing, exercise, shoes, temperatures. So what we're going to do is put patients under a heating blanket, gradually raise the temperature of that heating blanket. We don't expect to have to go past 75 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point the patient will experience flares. We'll establish a baseline. Then we will begin the dose escalation regime on them, and then start again with the heating blankets to see if we can induce the flares. The primary endpoint is the reduction of pain associated with the flares. A secondary endpoint is to see if we're actually successful in reducing the frequency of the flares. And just as a sidebar, someone who suffers from erythromelalgia, it is a very unfortunate illness because the flares are very easily triggered, and oftentimes people who have EM are hermetic. So we'll do this study, and if we're successful in showing a reduction of pain and even hopefully a reduction in the frequency, I think it'll have a pretty profound impact on the folks who suffer from this indication. The other major chronic pain program or chronic pain indication we're looking at is idiopathic small fiber neuropathy, which is a type of polyneuropathy of which there's no sort of genetic or other known cause for the neuropathy. This hits approximately 50% of the polyneuropathy patients, leaving us with a patient population in the United States of upwards of 80,000 individuals, and correspondingly worldwide in the many millions. Somewhat similarly, it's characterized by pain in extremities, a little more often in the hands, along with tingling and other effects. There are some drugs on the market, gabapentin being one of them, that provides some measure of relief for a small subset of the population. So generally speaking, while not as uncharacterized as EM, there is a large unmet medical need here. And someone who suffers from idiopathic small fiber neuropathy suffers from very extreme pain as well. On the pain scale, oftentimes EM, for those who suffer from it, is characterized as an 11 on a 10-point scale, whereas someone from idiopathic small fiber neuropathy is often in the 8 or 9 on the same scale. For those who are successful with gabapentin, a small subset, it's only successful in reducing the pain, by 1 or 2 points. So our goal here is to show greater efficacy in the reduction of pain. Our phase 2 study for small fiber neuropathy will follow the dose study as well as the pilot study for EM. It'll be a larger double-blind study on approximately 240 patients. And as I indicated, the intent is to show reduction in the pain amongst this orphan population. And then potentially as a secondary endpoint, show that we're successful in reducing pain in other indications. While we've not done any clinical work on it, there is some belief and indication that our drug might be effective in treating the pain associated with diabetic neuropathy, which is a much larger market. By going after small fiber neuropathy and EM first, we're able to take advantage of the orphan designated approval process, which is generally quicker, simpler, and cheaper, especially for a small company. And then if we show success there, move on to diabetic neuropathy or other indications. Our second announced program is for the treatment of eye pain. These indications will largely not be orphan designated. We're specifically targeting 2 to commence with, one for corneal abrasions and the pain associated with that, and the other for severe dry eye. Just an example, there are approximately 5 million corneal abrasions in the United States every year. And think sand or rose bush or rose thorns or something that scratches the cornea, and it can be extraordinarily painful. There's no, again, for these indications, there's no great therapeutic option. There are some limited use drugs that are available, lidocaine, for example, but overuse of lidocaine can lead to corneal melting. Topical steroids in the eye can lead to glaucoma. So there's the existing drugs have substantial side effects that are pretty detrimental. So in this indication, there's unmet medical need with quite a bit larger end user market. So where are we with this one? We've reduced the same core molecule to eye drops, and we plan to commence toxicology studies on rabbits in Q4, and then move immediately to humans in approximately May of 2025 for a full proof of concept study. As a summary of where we are overall, this chart shows the chronic pain program on the top and the eye pain program on the bottom. As I indicated earlier, we'll start the dose escalation study in late Q4 this year. In parallel with the EM pilot study, we'll have readouts on both of those by late 2025, and then move into the full proof of concept on ISFN with a readout on that in 2026. The eye pain program is subject to a different internal regulatory group of the FDA, and we actually expect that one to move quite a bit more swiftly because it's a topical versus an ingested tablet. As I mentioned, we'll start the animal tox, the rabbit tox study in Q4, and then move immediately into humans in May of 2025 for our phase 2 proof of concept, and then do parallel phase 3 studies in 2026. With an NDA submission in Q4 of 2026. So we expect the eye pain program to get to market sooner than that for the chronic pain program, and in any event, sometime in approximately 2 years. And again, there's a very, very large target market for that with unmet medical need. And for the chronic pain program, they're orphan designated, substantial unmet medical need, and can lead to potentially other much larger indications. Just a brief summary on some of the other NAV 1.7 efforts that have occurred in the past, which have largely been unsuccessful. There's a lot of detail here that you can review, but largely the prior efforts ran into issues that we are not experiencing. So in one instance, Pfizer had a drug for 1.7 pursuing diabetic neuropathy. but they ended up with high levels of cholesterol, and they were concerned about liver toxicity, and we believe benched that program. Biogen had a program to treat by way of a topical, but systemic absorption of a topical for a systemic issue is not a terribly effective delivery vehicle, and did not show success. So we have a clean drug that has been successful in all of the animal studies we've done, and are delivering it in a manner which we believe will target the specific indications. So I think we're in a much different position than some of the other prior efforts that have not worked out. Just a brief summary of our board and SAB. So our board of directors is comprised of 4 outside individuals and myself. You can read this at your leisure, but the one I'd like to point out is Todd Davis, who's our chairman, who's the CEO of Ligand Pharmaceuticals, has a great deal of experience in developing drug pipelines and royalty programs. So he's an invaluable asset to us. Finally, our SAB is chaired by Stephen Waxman, who's been involved in the program since its early days. He is an expert in sodium channel research for pain treatment therapies up at Yale. And he's joined by Robert Dworkin, who's an expert in clinical trial development. So very valuable members there. So finally, just to sum it all up, when I had the opportunity to consider joining Chromocell, I was struck by the incredible need for non-opioid pain treatment therapies, and our science is robust. The team around me is robust, and I'm really excited about the prospects of what we can do to treat various indications of pain, and do so in a manner that does not create or cause some of the very substantial unwanted side effects associated with opioids. So with that said, I'm happy to open the floor to questions, and we'll begin reviewing those promptly. So one question here, can you speak to your upcoming milestones and what the catalyst for a re-rating of Chromocell? So as I touched on a little bit earlier, we are working on pushing forward the 2 programs. For the chronic pain program, the launch of the dose and pilot study on EM in Q4 of this year, with the readout in Q3, early Q4 2025, will be sort of the primary catalysts on that one. For the eye pain program, we've got, because of the approval process, I think a more swift and greater frequency of catalysts on that one. So we'll be launching the rabbit tox studies in the next 45 or 60 days, and we'll have a readout on that in approximately March or April of 2025, and then move immediately into humans, and have a complete readout on that by Q3 or so of 2025. So I think those are the 2 primary those are the milestones associated with our 2 primary indications. We have a number of unannounced programs that we're working on, nothing to say yet, but based on the same core molecule that we anticipate providing disclosures on in the coming months as well. Next question is, what is your capital position and need for the next year? With our June 30 statements, we showed that we had approximately 2.4 million in cash on the balance sheet. We have a very lean operation. There are 4 employees, and we are largely outsourced. A lot of the work we're doing is through very cost-efficient CROs. So we have a minimal burn, and the cost of the rabbit tox study is in the low hundreds of thousands, for example. So we have a runway into early 2025. We will need to fund the programs going forward, but believe, frankly, at this valuation that we are, you know, well, I think it's a very good an entry point in valuation to, notwithstanding that, to looking at these programs. The overall market for the indications varies, of course, depending on the type, but because we have the chronic pain program now through all of its phase ones, we expect those two indications to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars per annum each. And again, remember that patients who suffer from this indication will be treated for life. Our drug is a treatment, not a cure. We may see efficacy in reducing the incidence of flares for EM, but the cessation of taking the drug will likely revert the patient back to the baseline. So we expect that these patients will unfortunately be lifelong consumers of our drug. For the eye pain programs, obviously the market's much larger, and expect to get to market more soon or more swiftly. So I think the ROI on future investment is very promising. So question here on any strategic or academic partners. We have, as I mentioned earlier, our SAB is led by Stephen Waxman up at Yale. To be clear, our relationship is with Stephen Waxman and not Yale, but we are able to take advantage of the learnings in some cases that Stephen has out of his lab. He's got one of the larger labs at Yale. So our relationship is with Stephen, and he's, as I mentioned, one of the leading experts in sodium channel research. We don't have any other academic partners per se. We are in regular contact with the Mayo Clinic, which has one of the largest databases of EM patients in the world. And when we move into our pilot study, expect to be taking advantage of that database. So nothing concrete at the moment, but we do have strong relationships with the Mayo and Yale, and are exploring others as well. So that's it for questions at the moment. I'll provide a brief moment if there are any further to add. Well, with that said, thank you all for attending today. I appreciate your time and giving me the opportunity to share with you the work we're doing at Chromocell to treat various indications of pain.